Hello, Tommy. You are up first, sir. Hello.
Yep. Hey, Bart. Thanks for having me on.
How's it going?
Yeah, pretty good. How are you?
All right, let's get into it. You got a hand for us here?
I do. So
All
this
right.
is a 2-3 no limit hand at Talking Stick.
Okay.
It's a $500 max buy-in. We're sitting around 700 effective. I cover the villain in this hand, and we've got 8 players at the table.
And this is somewhat of an etiquette question, if I remember correctly, right at the end? Is that
It
right?
is,
Okay.
which is at the end. Yep.
Right. So this is regular no limit now. It used to be sort of somewhat of a capped spread betting, although it probably didn't affect the small stakes games. That's what I hear from people in Washington State with these restricted betting per street. Usually it's not going to really affect the smaller stakes games like a 2-3, but it would affect like a 5-10 game.
Yep, I have heard that. I actually just recently moved here to Scottsdale, so since I've been, they haven't had the capped structure
Okay.
implemented, but it is true no limit now.
Okay. All right. So 2, 3, 500 cap. Okay.
Yep, and I'm sitting under the gun, and I look down at Ace of Hearts, Jack of Spades, and I make it 15.
Jack of Spades to 15. So Ace of Hearts, Jack of Spades, Hero raises to 15. Okay.
Yep, under the gun +1 calls,
Okay.
folds to the button. He's going to be the main villain in his hand, and he calls,
Okay.
and the big blind calls. So we're 4 ways to a flop.
So 3 people call you, really not out of the realm of normalcy at all at this level. $60 minus whatever the rake is. Okay.
Yep. So the flop comes Ace of Spades, 3 of Hearts, 7 of Diamonds.
Ace of Spades, 3 of Hearts, 7 of Diamonds. By the way, I just want to say something really quick here, too. I assume this was 9-handed, but I think the smaller stakes you go, the more, there's no way that this is a fold under the gun. Now, if you were playing 9-handed true no limit without an ante and people were playing close to what they're supposed to be playing pre-flop, then maybe I can get on board with sometimes folding ace-jack off from up front, but no way in a 2-3 game when people are calling with any ace. And I always said that I put king-queen off and ace-jack off in an under-the-gun open range when I was talking about sort of making range charts years ago at the Commerce 510 game, and that was because in a drop or that rake structure, at least one person was walking. On average, the game was 8-handed. So 8 to 9-handed, definitely ace-jack off and king-queen off. I think live 8-handed become an open. I just, not that anybody's saying that, but I'll just bring that up. So anyways, you flop top pair here. Ace 3-7, okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
The big blind checks. I down bet to 20.
Okay.
The under the gun +1 lets it go. The villain on the dealer or button calls.
So +1 folds and the button calls, is that right?
Yep, and the big blind folds.
All right, so +1 folds, button calls, big blind folds. Just one thing. I mean, I know you said that you were 5. So you started the hand 500. Is that right?
It was 700 effective.
700 effective. Do you happen to remember? So obviously you were talking about 700 effective with the button. Do you happen to remember the other guy's stacks at all? Just at all? I know it's probably various stacks.
Yeah, we were the 2 deepest stacks at the table, so
Okay.
I think I had maybe close to 1,000 in my stack. Everyone else was in the realm of 200 to 500.
So again, I'll look at this sort of in theory here. I think in theory, the theoretical thing, your bet actually is what you're supposed to do in theory multi-way here. And sometimes even check ace-jack where you might bet ace-king, ace-queen. In theory, you're supposed to bet really small here multi-way. You bet 1/3. Now, I know that there aren't any flush draws or anything like that. In reality, though, I got to tell you, and this is probably the best example of it with when you flop an ace as top pair with a good kicker, I would just start betting larger. Because again, probably one of the most overrepresented hands that people play too much at this level is ace X, any ace X suited, maybe ace X off. And I would just want to get more value in there. So this is with the whole thing where sometimes half pot can do a good job. Obviously 2/3, you can go 2/3, but half pot, which is not really sort of a solver approved sizing, can sometimes be an efficient bet in a somewhat of a multi-way scenario live. Everybody treats it as 1/3, but you're getting more money in there. That's it. I just wanted to eyeball how much money, obviously if the the other two guys have 200, then you can really start to, use some smaller sizing. But in general, I would bet larger here, even on this dry board. Even if you have no bluffs, that doesn't matter. That's really the crux here at the small stakes, is that you're not going to have somebody be like, Tom's not going to bet out here like $40 into 60, three ways without it. So I called him next to act with like ace deuce of clubs. I'm going to just fold. That does not happen ever at this stakes. So anyways, look at the pot's $100 now, right?
Yep.
Okay.
The turn is the 7 of clubs.
Okay.
And I go out and bet 35, which in retrospect is probably a little small here.
So hero bets 35. Not necessarily in the sense that, it's not quite like him calling in the big blind, but he's closing the action. And again, take this with a grain of salt for what people actually do at this level. But if you just want to understand sort of the theory of how they're supposed to play, he's not overcalling. He's not overcalling. So if you had a situation where you bet, somebody else called, like the +1 called, and then the button overcalled, I wouldn't be too concerned about a 7. Neither player should have a 7. Should is a big word, but here actually, he could have a 7 here, closing the action. So I don't think it's that terrible of a bet. I would still probably tend to go maybe a little bit larger, maybe half pot, but you're on board with the theory here where you don't have as many 7s as he does. But there isn't really a draw out there anyways. Okay, so you bet 35.
Yep, and he calls.
All right, button calls. And now it looks like we are at 170. Is that right?
Yep.
All right.
And the river is the queen of diamonds.
It's okay.
Yep. And my thinking here is if I check and face a large bet, I'm going to be in a bit of a difficult spot. So I, again, choose to bet pretty small with a plan to fold to a raise. And I bet 55.
Well, you don't want to not bet because you don't want to think about this in a way where you're like, oh, well, I was thinking about checking, but if I checked and you bet large, I wouldn't really know what to do. So instead I bet. That's not really a thing when you deconstruct that. Now, there are certain situations when you can check to induce a bluff or to get a guy to obviously value own something that is worse than your hand, meaning he's going to value bet a hand that's worse than yours, that he would otherwise fold to a bet, which is almost non-existent at this level. Or sometimes you can check with the intention of check folding. Obviously, it kind of sucks here that the kicker doesn't play. And it seems very, very unlikely that he really should either have an ace or a 7 here. I'm not a huge fan of making block bets at any. You have to be called by worse in order for a block bet to really work. Now, the question is, can you get called here by worse? You're betting 35 into 170.
Or 55 into 170.
Excuse me, 55 into 170. Yeah. Can you get called here by worse?
Yeah.
There's no draw. It's ace 3, 7, 7 queen. I just don't. I don't really see it. And the problem here with blocking is if somebody maybe not necessarily at this level, but someone could, somehow snuss out the fact that you're blocking and raise you and put you in a tough spot, representing a 7. Or something like that. So the whole block fold here, I don't know if I'm a huge fan of it because any ace is going to play. Like if you had ace king, it would make a whole lot more sense if you had ace king to block here. Why do you think that I say that?
Because I can get called by
any ace, right?
Ace. Yeah.
Yeah. But here it doesn't. So with that being said, even though I'm not a huge fan of check calling the river, I might check the river here for the sole reason that I don't really think I can really ever get called by a worse hand. We're either going to be behind or we're chopping. And maybe once in a while, although it doesn't even look like there's a backdoor draw here, he has something where he's going to bluff. So I might check and evaluate his sizing and expect it to go check a lot. But okay, so you went 55 and what happened?
He ends up making the call.
Okay.
And I tabled my hand, and he looks a bit disgusted and ends up throwing his cards into the muck. This is where it gets a little interesting. About 2 seconds after, as the dealer starts to pass the chips towards me, he asked the dealer pretty quietly if he can grab his hand back out of the muck. And the dealer says, nope, can't do that. Mm-hmm. And it seems pretty, obvious from at least the whole table's perspective that he did fold an ace and didn't realize that the queen on the river counterfeited my jack kicker. Mm-hmm. And my question here, I've never been in this spot before, and he seemed like, Villain was a pretty nice guy. Am I in any way obligated to ask if he had an ace and chop the pot with him? Or is it bad etiquette?
No, absolutely not. You're in absolutely no way. And some people like my etiquette takes, some people don't, or most people like them up until the Garrett Reddit thing. And I wish I had to do that video over, but I'll give you another example too. I saw something on Hustler Clips, because Garrett tries to be pretty good with the etiquette, but I saw something over on Hustler Clips where he was up against actually the same guy, Charles, where Charles made quads. This went up like yesterday or the day before, and Garrett had top full house. The board was like queen 7-7-7. The guy had a 7 for quads, and Garrett raised the river over a small bet with top full house. And Charles just went out and called. Like, he just put out the call, but Garrett hadn't raised him all in. So I believe that Charles actually left 2,000 in front of him, even though he had quads, because he thought that Garrett had put him all in. So he just puts out the chips as a call, and he left 2,000. And Garrett's not going to give him the extra 2,000. Like, that's just kind of part of the game, and it's the same thing here. If somebody mucks their hand because they can't read the board, you have absolutely no obligation. That's not even close to a thing. I mean, I actually had that happen to me once where I thought I got like a really bullshit ruling. There were a couple kind of shady floor men at Commerce, and this exact situation happened where I blasted river on a situation like this where my kicker didn't play, and the lady called and then folded, and she went into the muck, grabbed her hand, and pulled it out, and the floor man allowed it because she was a big tipper, which is just ludicrous. But if the guy can't read your hand, you're absolutely not obligated. I mean, even if the guy is a nice guy, but if you want to do it, that's fine. But no.
Yeah, and that's what I figured. I mean, it's just, how am I even going to know that he had an ace? I'd have to be taking his word. But I wouldn't imagine he'd be asking for his card backs if he didn't have an ace. So I felt bad for him, but ultimately, didn't end up chopping the pot with him.
Yeah, I mean, also too, like, you never know what the guy actually it's like one of these things where I would probably differ from a lot of people is because I think one of the other things too that people think, and I know it's not this way in California, because I get a lot of flack when I say this, people think that the muck is an end-all dead zone. It absolutely is not. It is not a dead zone. If the cards touch the muck and they are retrievable, the cards are not dead by rule just because they touch the muck. It's one of the most misunderstood, kind of like running it more than once, right, with the Mariano thing. Now, with that being said, though, there are only certain situations where the cards are really retrievable. This would not be one of them, but I'll give you a caveat to this. So let's say, for example, this is the difference between me and a guy who I think would be an asshole guy, or someone who's just like, doesn't really understand game flow. Like, say, you got called, right? And he mucked his hand, okay? But then he grabbed it. So the cards didn't get shuffled in the muck, right? Like, he was like, oh, wait a minute. He went and he grabbed it, okay? But, like, the cards touched the muck. But it's obvious to you, or it would be like when I'm playing against him, it would be obvious to me that he grabbed his 2 cards, right? Like, those are his cards. If I was playing at the table and he grabbed his 2 cards and they touched like the muck, but he grabbed him and he turned him over, I would chop the pot. But not in this case. Now, what I'm saying about people who are assholes is like people will go to their deathbed in that situation that I just gave, saying, his hand is dead. His hand's dead. It touched the muck. And personally, I just don't think that's good for the game. People can do whatever they want. But again, I'm a for-profit player. People play for different reasons. But your example, absolutely not. So anyways, I appreciate the call. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks, Bart.